Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. And this hour, we've been discussing a historic election. Now we look at what local elections say about access and inclusion. Voters across Michigan wrapped up a midterm election yesterday that, for many, began weeks earlier during the state's early voting window. For voters with disabilities, the right to cast a ballot is guaranteed in state law and under federal protections like the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Help America Vote Act. Yet audits in Metro Detroit have repeatedly found the opposite on the ground. Last year, Detroit Disability Power reported that only 13% of polling places were fully accessible across nearly 300 sites. And WDET's pre-election coverage highlighted widespread problems with entrances and accessible voting machines in Detroit. So today we're asking, what did access look like this time during early voting and on Election Day? Eric Welsby is the policy and advocacy lead at Detroit Disability. He joins me now. Eric, welcome back.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So before we get into specifics, can you briefly paint the scene from your vantage point, starting with the 9-day early voting period Michigan now offers? Tell us where voters with disabilities in Metro Detroit encountered smooth experiences and where they faced avoidable barriers.
Yeah, so, we've been looking at accessible voting in the sites all year. So we were up the I-75 corridor in Saginaw and Bay County looking at early voting sites back in May. We did the entire city of Detroit in August. And then this election, we were actually in a lot of the first and second ring cities here. So we've done probably about 450 unique sites this year looking at it. And that covers, urban areas, it covers rural areas, and everything in between. And what we find is, a lot of the same problems that, in places with old buildings, there's a lot of infrastructure problems that create barriers, crumbling parking lots, ramps that aren't in good shape, where pavement's heaved and it's just not accessible, to, issues that are really about human choices, about where the VAT's placed. Is it placed to protect secrecy?
Those are voter assist terminals.
I apologize. So the voter assist terminal, which is there to assist disabled voters, but honestly anyone can use, and they're great. They're touchscreen. Young people love them because they're more fun to touch a screen than fill in the little bubbles. Sure. These types of things that are really, really fixable. And so what we find is, problems exist everywhere. These specific problems do vary. What we kind of found most recently, in Detroit, is, we have old buildings and those are always a problem. But there are these human issues that, we're seeing some progress on some and not progress on others.
How widespread is the problem? Because Detroit's top election official, Clerk Janice Winfrey, said on our show ahead of the primary that, quote, less than 5 Detroit polling places had accessibility problems. And that was a claim that your group disputed, and you came on our show, the Metro, to talk about that. After observing this election, what's your characterization of problems? What's your message as well to Clerk Winfrey?
I mean, I would say one, to say it is less than 5 is just to ignore reality. We have some very specific examples, but it's not hard to go into most polling places and find real issues where there isn't compliance. And, the clerk has made some improvements on some things, but the problems persist. And fixing one part of the problem does not solve the whole problem. And so, as she's been working to, have better assistance and support there, we applaud that and we really like it, but we've got to really deal with the systemic issues that exist of making sure poll workers understand how to set up the VAT and how to assist voters in doing it. And we saw yesterday specific examples of people going into polling locations to use the VAT, particularly at Fire Station 17. One of our members went in to use the VAT as they always do, and the workers just were not prepared. They didn't know. They had to call the clerk's office to figure out how to get it up and running right, which that all should have done before any voter walked into that place. And I think there's a lot of bias against disabled voters, of people, feeling put out that they have to set up the VAT and that they have to provide the support that's required by law. And so, some of this is the structures of how the election workers are trained and how they do their job. But there is just a cultural bias against disabled folks and feeling that disabled folks are a burden, and no one should go to vote and be made to feel they're a burden. It is their right.
Talk about the psychological effects, the cascading effects of that, of being someone who really wants to participate in the civic process. And they have these experiences that make them feel less than, where people are not prepared to assist them, where it turns into a big deal that they're just trying to make their voice heard and do something that all Americans should have the right to do and be able to do in an easy way.
Yeah. Earlier, about 2 months ago, we did or about a month and a half ago, we did a kind of a mock pilot election with some volunteers with the city of Dearborn Heights, where we brought in some disabled voters to come in and do a mock election, and really to help Dearborn Heights look at their process and their structure, and how equipped are they to accommodate disabled voters? And as part of that, in talking with one of our volunteer voters for that, she is low vision and identified that this was actually her first time, casting any ballot in person at a mock voting site, but because she stopped going to election sites, she started absentee voting, even though she likes going in person, but she had so many bad experiences, she just switched over to absentee. Because why be made to feel like you're a problem when literally you're just trying to carry out your votes? And I think there's a lot of disabled folks out there that are making choices about where and how they're voting that might not be their first choice, but they feel that they have no other option because of the way they're made to feel, and simply trying to do what every citizen is encouraged to do, that we lift up as like, this is the thing. You want to be a good citizen, you go and vote.
Yeah.
And yet when they do it, they're made to feel like, yeah, but kind of not you.
Right. Right. Yeah, there's an asterisk to that. What about the early voting sites? Were they any better than polling locations on actual election day?
I think the early voting sites do tend to be better, in a lot of cases, because instead of, talking about whether it's Detroit with its, over 150, 160 sites, or, other municipalities that have 5 or 10 sites, to go down to just, one site, or in Detroit, 14 sites, you're able to pick some of your best sites, or you're able to use an alternative site that maybe you can't get on election day, but you can get for that 9-day period, or some municipalities only did 2 or 3 days this time. But you find that they're able to pick a site that really tends to be better. A lot of times they tend to be newer buildings or recently renovated buildings, so the physical infrastructure tends to be ADA compliant at minimum, and those types of things. So at early voting sites, a lot more of it, I think, is the decision making in the space of how is the VAT set up? Did you set up a wheelchair height voting booth? Those types of things really become more of a factor. There are certainly exceptions, but when we look at Detroit and we look at the sites, a lot of them are some of the bigger sites. We do some of them at the East and West Wayne County Community College campuses, and those buildings, they're classrooms, right? So they're set up for students to get in. They are in compliance. So those sites physically are really, really good. And so then it comes down to, did the setup happen in ways that ensure the voter can get to the VAT, get to the accessible voting booth? Are they set up in ways that ensure that voter can vote independently and privately, and those types of things?
Eric, in the last minute we have here, Detroit has more than 100,000 voting age residents with disabilities, and roughly a third of Michigan's voting age population has a disability. What is it going to take for Metro Detroit to move from annual audits to sustained compliance so voters aren't rolling the dice every election?
I think a big part of it is clerks engaging with our group or others. There's many other disability groups working on this stuff. Warriors on Wheels works on this. Disability Rights Michigan works on this. Plus, the Secretary of State has an accessibility ombudsperson. Partner with us. Talk to us. We will help you find solutions. If you don't get it, that's okay. More people don't get it than get it, but that's why we're here. We want to help. We want to help find solutions. We want to help set up structures and training and all the things that are going to help make your election workers successful.
Eric Welsby, Policy and Advocacy Lead with Detroit Disability Power. Thank you so much for joining me, especially after a long night last night.
Thank you.
Coming up, Kerry Jr. II will check in with the Oakland County Clerk on voting in the county and security issues there. Plus, we'll talk voter turnout, which is low in Detroit and lower on midterm elections. That's next on the Metro. Stay with us.